everyone, my name is Isabella, and today I'll be diving into language production. More specifically, filler words. My question is, how do filler words facilitate speaker-listener cooperation and spontaneous communication? This question was motivated by our class discussion on audience design, since we saw that speakers and listeners exhibit some form of cooperation when communicating, whether it's through audience design or pragmatic reasoning and inference. So for audience design, speakers can adjust to improve their listeners' comprehensions, such as using lexical, syntactic, prosodic, and other means to disambiguate their speech. While for pragmatic reasoning, speakers and listeners kind of mutually utilize pragmatic inference of context clues, sentence semantics, cultural understandings, and so on. One might ask then, how do filler words play into this discussion of language production? Is the use of filler words in conversation more of an egocentrically motivated kind of purpose, or does it serve a pragmatic role? For my use of the term filler words here, I'm talking about filled pauses or discourse markers, and these are one-syllable segments like or lengthened vowels to take up pauses such as the or like, or empty phrases such as you know or like. My primary hypothesis is that filler words act as a type of pragmatic cue that can adjust conversational pace, facilitate turn-taking, and indicate speaker intent. So this ability to adjust conversational pace might provide interlocutors to have more time to remember and track each other's conveyances, goals, intent, whatnot. And in this way, filler words are integral to effective mutual communication, serving multiple pragmatic functions that enhance cooperation. Some alternative hypotheses are that 1, filler words are filtered out by listeners and actually don't really play a significant role in cooperation, or that they play a negative role as just speech errors. But this would imply that filler words are non-essential and non-contributory. The second alternative hypothesis is that filler words are deliberate signals from the speaker that inform the listener that they should not interrupt or that they need a few moments to collect their thoughts before talking again. And this would be a way that speakers could cater to the listeners to make their comprehension easier using the filler words, and would be an example of audience design. Some more background and review would be that communication in real life is, of course, dynamic, frequent, and spontaneous in a lot of cases, and past research on filler words in production, as I just discussed, highlights the multifunctional role of filler words and their potential impacts on communication. But whereas those alternative hypotheses kind of look more at just the speaker or just the listener and how filler words act as language mechanisms for them, I'm looking to fill in the gap of how filler words play a role in their cooperation, and especially in how we are able to track interlocutor information when we collaborate and communicate. To study this, my methodology that I propose is using a conversation task where participants are paired and engage in discussion about a given topic presented by the researcher to them. And the conversations and interactions would then be video recorded and analyzed for their use of filler words, turn-taking, and indications of cooperation or misunderstanding. This could be through verbal acknowledgments like, oh, what did you mean by that? Or, I get it. Or nonverbal cues like, the participants, I would use a sample size of around 40 to 60 adult native monolingual English speakers that would be evenly split between genders and then randomly paired to ensure that confounding factors like language proficiency, cultural background, gender, and age are controlled for, and that the adult participants would have developed pragmatic language and conversational skills already. In terms of experimental design and materials, the scenarios should prompt participants to engage in a task-oriented conversation like planning an event, and the conversations would be meant to naturally elicit filler words by the manipulation of complexity of the task and familiarity with the topics in the scenarios. So for the first condition, it would be simple familiar, which would be to discuss a simple everyday activity that they are familiar with. And for complex familiar, there would be a more complex activity, but it would be familiar. For the simple unfamiliar condition, there would be discussion of a simple task in an unfamiliar context. And for complex unfamiliar, the participants would discuss an unfamiliar topic that was also complex. An example experimental item that could be given to the participants would be the researcher would instruct them to engage in a 5-minute conversation for the following conditions, which would then be recorded for analysis. But for an example simple familiar condition, they could be asked, plan a day trip to the beach, discuss what to bring and what activities to do. For complex familiar, they could be asked to organize a large family gathering, including meals for 20 people, sleeping arrangements, and entertainment for all ages. In the simple unfamiliar condition, an example would be describe the process of cooking a simple dish from a cuisine neither of you has tried before from memory after reviewing the recipe provided. And in the complex unfamiliar condition, they could be asked, plan a hypothetical week-long trip to Mars, discuss transportation, living arrangements, and what to pack. Some advantages to this method would be that this way of engaging participants in a structured way that could be replicable is still spontaneous, and it demonstrates a more real-time communication between speaker and listener, and how filler words play a role in that interaction. By analyzing conversations that mimic these real-life conversations under varying levels of complexity and familiarity, the experiment can then discern if filler words are employed naturally and pragmatically, which would support my primary hypothesis, or if they are inconsequential to, detract from, or are altruistic in effective communication, which would align with the alternative hypotheses. For my primary hypothesis that filler words are pragmatic cues that facilitate cooperation, I would expect a result of increase of filler word use in the complex and unfamiliar conditions, since it would show their role as pragmatic cues that manage conversational pace, aid turn taking, etc. And the pattern would kind of show more filler word use as the prompts become more complex and more unfamiliar. This kind of the conclusion that could be drawn from this outcome would be that filler words would play a functional role in facilitating speaker-listener cooperation, and that as more complex and unfamiliar topics become, speakers will use more filler words as pragmatic cues to kind of aid the collaboration and communication process. For the first alternative hypothesis, that filler words are filtered out by the listeners, I would expect a result of more uniform usage of filler words throughout all of the conditions, since the filler words would not really significantly impact the communication process, since they're ignored by the listeners. From this conclusion, from this result, the conclusion that I would draw is that filler words don't significantly contribute to the cooperative nature of spontaneous communication, and they're more so an individually based habitual part of speech that the listeners can filter out on a individual basis as well. And for the alternative hypothesis 2, in favor of audience design for the speaker would be using audience design. I would expect the result to be an increase in filler words for more complex conditions, since the pattern would indicate a deliberate use of filler words to purposefully improve the listener's comprehension. And this result would indicate that filler words are used as a kind of deliberate strategy that helps the listener with the complexity of the communication, and that speakers would be consciously or subconsciously using the filler words to make their speech more comprehensible or to buy time for the listener to enhance their understanding. So the kind of future directions and implications of my proposal are that, first, there can certainly be individual variations in how filler words are used. So even though I'm proposing that they can be used as pragmatic cues, surely they vary based on personality or anxiety level of each person. And also, cognitive load might be a confounding factor, since higher pressure situations might elicit more filler words from people, and this would kind of impact the way that I should interpret my results. But a more robust way to generalize the results of the study would be to look at filler words across cultures and languages, so gestural languages or tonal languages. And finally, filler word use in the social realm should be looked at in future research, since there might be a gender difference in filler word selection and perception across genders. These are my references. Thank you.